Individuals and entities who appear on Russian media should be singled out and exposed, according to a right-wing think tank. A report from the Henry Jackson Society was published ahead of a European Parliament session on countering perceived Russian propaganda. RTUK's Polly Boyko has more.
It's a British conservative think tank. It's been around for a few years. We've requested an interview on the report from them now. We're waiting to hear back. But over the past few years, they have been boycotting us somewhat. They had appeared a few times and then they stopped. It's a little awkward because we actually work in the same building as them. So we have some rather awkward lift journeys with some of their employees. The title speaks volumes. It's all about Putin's useful idiots, and it talks about how the people that appear on RT are basically apologists for Vladimir Putin. The main message is that if they receive fees for their appearances, then that means that they've taken money from the Kremlin, thus establishing financial links between the Kremlin and themselves and their organizations. It talks about there being similar connections during the Cold War, and it names and shames a lot of the guests that regularly appear on the channel as well. In fact, the whole report is framed in a very sort of Cold War-esque way, and its recommendations at the end get downright McCarthyist. In the conclusion, it says that activists, journalists and politicians should point out the pro-Russian connections of individuals and parties who appear on Russian state-backed media. They need to be challenged through political debates. So they're saying, let's identify these people, let's challenge them, let's shame them. And they also talk about needing to map out the personal and organizational connections of people to Russian organizations. But the kicker, the real kicker in the recommendations in this report is that parliaments, and they're saying parliaments all across Europe, should amend their legislation or pass new laws that forces politicians to declare any media appearances that they make. And that way, politicians won't be able to go on state-backed broadcasters like RT and sort of express an implicit approval of that particular state. You may think that this is just a strongly worded report and think tanks come out with all sorts of stuff on a regular basis. We see that in the media all the time, but this particular report is going to be presented in the European Parliament on Wednesday, and this report is going to be presented as part of a debate called How to Tackle Russian and ISIS Propaganda. So there you have it, Russia and ISIL, not for the first time in recent months, used in the same sentence and somehow equated to one another.
Well, for more on this, I'm now joined by RTUK's Going Underground host, Afshin Rattansi, and Dr. Paul Monaghan, the SNP MP for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross. Afshin, a lot of people named and shamed in this report have appeared on your very programme. Are they useful idiots?
That is the big question that comes out of this very important, rather flimsy report, which actually gets a hearing in Parliament in 48 hours. Are they useful idiots? Well, certainly everyone on this show, this news bulletin, I think former senior cabinet ministers, people representing hundreds of thousands of workers, tens of thousands of workers, would get, maybe they'll sue for defamation here. But I mean, you know, we know they're frightened of the 50-odd journalists here in London doing the kind of news that obviously there is a market for here in Britain, but they're not useful idiots to appear on this programme. At least, I think General Mike Flynn, the man appointed for the Defense Intelligence Agency in the US by President Obama, and now looks set to be the next United States National Security Advisor. I hardly think he's going to be like the Henry Jackson Society after being called a useful idiot.
Well, that's very interesting. We'll talk to another so-called useful idiot, Dr. Paul Monaghan. Good to see you tonight. Now, apparently, the report says that Putin is a deceptive and dangerous friend for politicians in Europe. So are you then friends with Mr. Putin? Because you appear on this channel, you were here in the studio last week.
Well, good evening. I think the first thing I'd say is that I don't particularly appreciate being called a useless idiot or a useful idiot or any kind of idiot for that matter. I think I have read the report. I think it's an unfortunate report. It's fairly typical of the Henry Jackson Society, unfortunately. It doesn't really take this debate any further forward. I think what we need to be doing as politicians and as academics anywhere in the world is talking to one another. We need to have dialogue. We need to avoid monologue. and we need to be working together to try to build a better world.
Afshin, could you just give us the context of this Henry Jackson Society? Who are they exactly?
Hugely criticised as being Islamophobic from lots of different sides of the debate here in Britain. Ironically, Henry Jackson was a US president who opposed Joe McCarthy, and I think many people will be looking to this and to the European Parliament debate as a means of trying to curb the free speech that we certainly value here in this newsroom. I would say, though, that one of the patrons of the Henry Jackson Society, they obviously didn't check it before writing this absurd report, is a man who used to run the CIA, James Woolsey. He was on RT just in the past few days.
Really? Appearing on one of our programmes?
So a patron of the Henry Jackson Society has been called a useful idiot by the Henry Jackson Society. They should check, before.
But Paul Monaghan, Russia is perceived to be a threat to European security at the moment, meddling in US politics, also bringing the world to the brink of a new Cold War, what with its threat to invade supposedly the Baltic states. It's hardly surprising, is it not, that channels like this will get this sort of perceived image. Do you have a problem as an MP coming on here, and what sort of reaction do you get from fellow MPs when you come onto the programme?
I don't have a problem coming on RT. I think the feedback that I get from colleagues in Westminster is quite good. I think people, certainly my constituents, quite often tell me that they value RT's news output. They value the breadth and depth of reporting that takes place. And I don't think anybody seriously considers that politicians going on RT are apologists for the Russian government or for the President of Russia. I think people really look at RT as being a broadcaster that has a degree of impartiality and offers something different, perhaps, to what we might get from mainstream media in the UK, stations like, for example, the BBC.
There's a reference to the fact that people like you, there's a reference to the fact that people get paid to come on the channel, therefore they're receiving money from the Kremlin. Do you get paid to come onto RT?
No, I obviously don't get paid to come on RT. I don't get paid to appear in any TV station or any newspaper for that matter. I think politicians, genuine politicians, choose to come on stations like RT because they've got a message that they want to deliver. That message, in my case, is always one of hope, of opportunity, of positivism for the future. We want to be seen as the Scottish National Party to be a valued partner of other nations around the world. And we can only do that by talking to people. This report by the Henry Jackson Society doesn't really give an alternative to wanting to stifle free speech. It left me with the impression that they're quite happy for politicians that subscribe to the aims of the Henry Jackson Society to be able to talk to Russian media and other stations, but not politicians and academics that might hold views that are contrary to the Henry Jackson Society. And that doesn't seem to me to be particularly democratic or in keeping with free speech.
OK, Paul, thank you for that. But Afshin, an MP there, pretty unfazed by all of this, but could you actually have problems now getting people onto your programme as a result of something like this?
Luckily, we pay our guests $50,000 for 10 minutes. So hopefully this report will ironically attract many more people, certainly to going underground, than otherwise would appear. In all seriousness, and I think Paul made the point there quite clearly, the dangers of these kinds of institutions deliberately trying to stifle debate. Unless you think like the Henry Jackson Society, you're not allowed. That is anti-democratic.
OK, but what sort of traction could this get in the European Parliament when this report is actually submitted on Wednesday?
Luckily, I think around the world, and this is a station with a global reach of 700 million, I think what happens in Europe, I think the British people spoke about, didn't they, at a recent referendum?
Got bad news for you. Come in your time off, and we're not paying you to appear on this news programme. Sorry about that, Afshin. Dr. Paul Monaghan, thank you very much indeed for joining us live on RTUK. Afshin Rattansi, looking forward to your next programme, Going Underground.
Thank you.